Hi, my name is Avery Swordviger.
My name is Haley Sutherland.
Today we're going to take you along the journey of 9 brave students and many others whose lives help better schools for Blacks all over the United States. This is the triumph of how Little Rock 9 changed schools forever.
In the 1950s, before the civil rights movement of the Little Rock Nine, it was a time where African Americans were facing segregation and segregation laws. African Americans had been fighting against racial discrimination for centuries. During the 1950s, however, the struggle against racism and segregation entered the mainstream of American life. During this time, many things were restricted for African Americans. They couldn't use the same bathrooms as whites, eat at the same restaurants, or even sit in the same spots on buses. In 1954, in the Brown v. Board of Education case, the Supreme Court declared that separate educational facilities for Black children were inherently unequal. This ruled against the Jim Crow laws. Though this was a big step in the equal rights of African Americans, there were many Southern whites that resisted the Brown ruling. They withdrew their children from public schools and enrolled them in all-white schools, and they used violence and intimidation to prevent Blacks from asserting their rights. A well-known white supremacist group that had used these tactics during that time was the KKK. They were known to burn down freedmen schools, kill African Americans, and much more. The hate against African Americans during the time wasn't just confined to the KKK, but also throughout many Americans. In 1956, more than 100 Southern congressmen even signed a Southern Manifesto declaring that they would do all that they could to defend segregation. During this time, African Americans weren't getting the educations that they deserved purely because of their color of their skin. Many things contributed to the discrimination against African Americans, but the main factor was segregation, and something needed to be done about it. Brown v. Board of Education was a 1954 Supreme Court case where justices would eventually rule that racial segregation of children in public schools was unconstitutional. This would prove that the idea of separate but equal education was not actually equal at all. In 1951, a man by the name of Oliver Brown would file a class action lawsuit against the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, once his daughter Linda Brown wasn't able to attend Topeka's all-white elementary schools. In Brown's case, he would claim that the schools for Black children were not equal at all to the schools for white children. He also claimed that segregation in schools violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which says that no state can deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Brown v. Board of Education went to the United States District Court in Kansas, but would have little effect immediately despite efforts from Brown and the NAACP. It wouldn't be until Earl Warren became Chief Justice in 1953 that things would change. By the next year, there was a unanimous decision against school segregation. On May 17, 1954, Warren said that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place, and that the plaintiffs were being deprived of the equal protection of the laws guaranteed by the 14th Amendment.
The day that the Little Rock Nine integrated into Central High School was on September 3, 1957. In 1957, the NAACP registered 9 Black students to integrate into Little Rock Central High School, and these 9 students were Ernest Green, Elizabeth Eckford, Jefferson Thomas, Terrence Roberts, Carlotta Walls, Minnie Jean Brown, Gloria Ray, Thelma Mothershed, and Melba Patillo. Elizabeth Eckford walked into school the next day on September 4, 1957, by herself and was then publicly humiliated and harassed by the white students of Central High School. As Elizabeth walked into school on September 4th, she was then spit on by several of the white students in the school, and in her own words, "It was only then that I realized that they were barring me, that I wouldn't go to school. As I stepped out into the street, the people who had been across the street started surging forward behind me, and so I headed in the opposite direction to where there was another bus stop. Safety, to me, meant getting to that bus stop." Elizabeth stated in an interview that the chants the crowd was yelling were 2468, we don't want to integrate, 2468, we don't want to integrate. Lynch her, we don't want to integrate. In a CBS Evening News interview, Melba Pattillo said,
High school experience are always with me. They just sort of don't go away.
Minnie Jean Brown then said after Melba,
The world came to Little Rock to see what would happen.
She also talked about how the 9 students felt when she said,
One of the things I think that comes up is the fear, how we felt, and how we were so shattered.
Minnie Jean Brown also said that they weren't invited to the prom or to any other social events. Also, on September 4th, the Little Rock Nine attempted to enter Central High School, and they were then turned away by the National Guard, who were called in by Governor Orville Faubus. On September 4th, 1957, President Dwight D. Eisenhower called in federal troops to escort the Little Rock Nine into Central High School. Later on during this time, in February of 1958, Minnie Jean Brown was expelled from Central High School because of several incidents with white students. Ernest Green became the first out of the Little Rock Nine to graduate from Central High School in 1958. In 1959, in Little Rock, Arkansas, there was a rally at the state capitol to protest the integrations and to continue with segregation and life as it was. In 1960, Jefferson Thomas graduated from Central High School. In 1965, the parents of the Little Rock Nine students filed a lawsuit in federal district court contending that their children were not allowed to go to white schools. This, however, was only the beginning for the ending of segregation from schools and soon to be everything across America. Although during this time, the 9 students were harassed and basically publicly humiliated, they made a better change for the world. They started the desegregation of schools. Central High School was one of the first public schools to desegregate in America, which shortly after led to the desegregation of public schools across the United States. When schools started to desegregate, everything else followed shortly after. The Little Rock Nine was also the start of ending the idea separate but equal. During this time period, there were separate bathrooms, schools, restaurants, and there were many other problems as well. One of these other problems was where to sit in public transportation, which led to the Montgomery bus boycott, which started when a black woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat in the bus and was then arrested. When whites realized that blacks will fight for their place in society and won't give up, whites slowly started to accept desegregation. Even the people that harassed the Little Rock Nine in their time of their segregation to Central High School later in life went as far as going to their house to apologize for their actions. Thanks to the people like the Little Rock Nine and many others, segregation is a part of the past, along with most discrimination. Although this may be the case in America, the same cannot be said for the whole world. In some countries, and unfortunately some parts of the United States, discrimination is still very prominent against the black race. With this being said, if people keep persevering just like the Little Rock Nine did, change is possible. Thank you to the Little Rock Nine and all others who devoted their life to this cause. It is thanks to them that we live in a society today where we are equal and not separate.